What if the terrifying numbness you feel in a crowded church isn't your faith dying, but the violent, beautiful birth of your true awakening? They told you questioning was a sin. They lied. Watch until the end to discover the shocking truth about your liberation. Have you ever stood shoulder to shoulder in a crowded sanctuary, the music swelling, hundreds of hands raised in absolute surrender, while a cold, terrifying numbness clawed at your chest? You watched the tears stream down the faces of the faithful. You recited the ancient creeds verbatim. You bowed your head exactly when you were instructed to. Yet deep within the darkest, quietest chambers of your own heart, you felt absolutely nothing. Nothing but a haunting, suffocating emptiness. What if I told you that this terrifying silence, this creeping dread that makes you feel so profoundly broken and irreparably abandoned, is not the symptom of a dying faith? What if, right at this very second, the dreadful emptiness you feel is actually the violent, beautiful birth pang of your true awakening? Bible Tales US 07 warmly welcomes you to a sacred space where your deepest, most dangerous doubts are finally given a voice. If this resonates with the quiet, desperate ache in your soul, please consider subscribing to our channel to support us in uncovering more of these profound, hidden truths together. We need to talk about the heavy secret you have been hiding. For years, you have been swallowing the rising panic, desperately pushing down that terrifying question, whispering in the back of your mind as you stared at the grand altars and the polished, perfectly timed performances. Is this truly all there is? You made the exhausting, agonizing compromises just to survive. You nodded along to sermons that felt incredibly hollow. You forced your lips to sing lyrics that felt like dry ash on your tongue, and you silently wondered why the boundless creator of the entire universe felt millions of light years away from that perfectly organized room. You stayed silent because stepping out of the fold felt like a spiritual death sentence. They looked you in the eye and taught you that to question the rigid machinery of the institution was to commit treason against the divine. They convinced you that the creeping numbness in your bones was a direct result of your own grotesque inadequacy. You were commanded to simply pray harder, serve more, and blind yourself to the glaring inconsistencies. But I am speaking to you now, not as a distant authority, but as a fellow traveler who has bled on those very same altars, and I promise you that your deconstruction is not a sin. It is a brilliant, divine strategy. Imagine a seed trapped inside a tiny, decorative clay pot. As it grows, its roots press violently against the walls. The shattering of that clay is not the death of the plant. It is the brutal, necessary destruction of a prison that can no longer contain its magnificent growth. The heavy guilt and agonizing confusion you carry right now are simply the sounds of your own clay cracking. Take a deep breath and step with me into the secret place, where you are safe and where your questions are the very key to your ultimate freedom. As the jagged pieces of that familiar clay pot finally fall away, you are forced to take a hard, unflinching look at the soil you were actually planted in. We have to examine the anatomy of the cage we called home and look back at how subtly the deception took root in our lives. It did not begin with malice. Perhaps, generations ago, it began as a genuine, desperate human attempt to grasp the hem of the divine. But somewhere along the line, the beautiful, untamed mystery of the Creator was traded for the cheap idol of absolute certainty. The infinite, boundless breath of God was sterilized, neatly categorized, and compressed into a rigid theology that fit perfectly onto a Sunday morning projector screen. We were handed a sterile curriculum instead of a compass, and we were taught that spiritual maturity meant never asking a question that the pastor could not answer with a memorized verse. You remember the unspoken rules, do you not? The transactional nature of it all. If you behaved impeccably, if you tithed your specific percentage, if you said the correct words with the correct inflection, God was obligated to bless you. It was a spiritual vending machine, coated in stained glass. But when the tragedies of actual human existence struck, when the cancer returned, when the marriage dissolved, when the depression pinned you to the floor, the gatekeepers of the institution had nothing to offer but empty platitudes and veiled accusations that your faith was simply too weak. They built a system dependent on your perpetual guilt. They needed you to feel just broken enough to require their weekly antidote, but never healed enough to walk out the door and realize you could speak to the maker of the stars without their permission. You were gaslit into believing that your authentic spiritual hunger was actually a symptom of a rebellious heart. But looking back now, you can see the glaring cracks in their foundational walls. You recognize that protecting the brand of the church had become far more important than protecting the souls bleeding on its pews. Realizing this is not an act of rebellion, it is an act of profound, heartbreaking clarity. You are finally seeing the man behind the curtain and discovering that the terrifying wizard who demanded your blind allegiance was just a frightened, fragile system terrified of losing its control. Stripping away those comfortable layers of manufactured truth thrusts you out the heavy oak doors and directly into the unforgiving, howling wind of the spiritual wilderness. Let us not romanticize this part of the journey, because the reality of untangling yourself from the only spiritual home you have ever known is a profound, agonizing grief. Deconstruction is not a trendy, intellectual exercise. It is a violent tearing of the flesh. When you step out of the machinery, you do not just lose a belief system, you lose your entire community, your social safety net, and the comforting rhythm of your life. You suddenly find yourself staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m, paralyzed by the phantom terrors of hellfire that were violently programmed into your subconscious since childhood. The silence of your Sundays becomes deafening. Friends who once called you a brother or a sister now look at you with a mixture of suspicion, pity, or outright hostility, treating you like a contagious disease they might catch if they listen to your doubts for too long. The absolute isolation of this wilderness makes you question your own sanity. You wonder if you made a catastrophic mistake, if you are simply arrogant, or if you are hopelessly lost in the dark. The process of mourning the God you thought you knew is exhausting. You will cry tears of anger for the years you surrendered to a system that fundamentally misunderstood your worth. You will grieve the relationships that evaporated the moment you stopped echoing the party line. Yet, inside this hollow, aching void, a vital excavation is taking place. I need you to understand that this terrifying dark night of the soul is the very crucible of your liberation. You are not losing your mind, you are losing your conditioning. This wilderness is not a punishment for your questions. It is the sacred, ancient proving ground where everything false, everything inherited, and everything toxic is burned away in the fierce heat of your own honesty. You must unbecome everything they forced you to be before you can discover who you actually are. Yet, it is precisely in the desolate quiet of that wilderness, where the programmed static of the megachurch finally fades, that you begin to hear the true voice again. It starts as a whisper, so incredibly faint and unfamiliar that you almost miss it. You realize, with a sudden, breathtaking rush of tears, that the divine did not stay behind in that building. The divine was waiting for you out here in the wild all along. Without the heavy burden of having to defend a fragile theology, your eyes are suddenly open to the sacredness of the ordinary. You begin to encounter God, not in a booming pulpit, but in the quiet, steady rhythm of the ocean waves, in the sprawling cathedral of an ancient forest, and in the unmerited kindness of a stranger. You find a deeper, more authentic communion in a tear-filled conversation over a cup of coffee with a friend who loves you unconditionally, without requiring you to sign a statement of faith. The Jesus you discover out here in the margins looks radically different from the polished, conquering CEO you were sold. This is the bruised, wandering carpenter who sits with the outcasts, who touches the untouchable, and who fiercely opposes the religious elite who use God's name to oppress the vulnerable. You begin to understand that the sacred texts were never meant to be a rigid scientific manual or a weapon to bludgeon the marginalized, but rather a beautiful, complex tapestry of humanity wrestling with the infinite. The fear of stepping out of line is replaced by a magnificent, breathless curiosity. You finally taste grace. Not the conditional, transactional grace that demands your obedience, but a wild, reckless, oceanic grace that washes over your brokenness and tells you that you are fundamentally, inherently good. For the first time in your entire life, the heavy spiritual armor you have been dragging around clatters to the ground. You do not have to perform anymore. You do not have to have all the answers. The terrifying expanse of the unknown ceases to be a threat and slowly transforms into an invitation to simply rest in the arms of a love that is entirely unbothered by your profound human messiness. Stepping fully into this expansive reality, you finally realize that you did not lose your faith at all. You merely lost your suffocating borders. You have crossed over into a new way of being, where doubt is no longer the enemy of belief, but its most intimate companion. You have learned the beautiful art of holding the great mysteries of the universe with open, empty hands, rather than trying to trap them in a tightly clenched fist. The deep wounds you suffered at the altars of organized religion have not disappeared, but they have miraculously transformed. Those scars are no longer marks of your inadequacy. They are the fierce, glowing badges of your survival and the wellspring of your deep empathy for others who are still trapped inside the walls. You now know that spirituality is not a destination to be reached or a fortress to be defended, but a vast, wild river to be navigated with courage and a perpetually open heart. You no longer need a middleman to translate the whispers of the divine, because your own soul has become the Holy of Holies. The endless striving has ceased, replaced by a profound, unshakable peace that surpasses all human understanding. Your journey has only just begun, but the heavy lifting of carrying an artificial God is utterly finished. If you are sitting there right now, covered in the dust of your shattered clay pot, terrified of the horizon, I want to leave you with this absolute truth. You are remarkably brave. You possess a spiritual integrity so deep that you chose the agonizing truth of the wilderness over the comfortable lie of the institution. You are part of a massive, hidden communion of wanderers, mystics, and holy misfits who are quietly rebuilding a faith entirely based on radical love and boundless freedom. So dry your tears, take a deep breath of this fresh, untethered air, and walk forward into the glorious unknown. The sanctuary of the open sky is waiting for you, and for the very first time, you are finally, truly home. The journey of spiritual deconstruction is not a loss of faith, but a courageous shedding of the toxic, manufactured boundaries that once confined it. It begins with the painful realization that the rigid, institutionalized religion we were taught was often a gilded cage built on transactional obedience and control, rather than an authentic connection with the divine. Breaking free from this suffocating system thrusts us into a terrifying wilderness of isolation, grief, and profound doubt. Yet, this dark night of the soul serves as a vital crucible where our inherited, fear-based conditioning is finally burned away. By stepping outside the heavy doors of organized religion, we stop performing and start truly listening. In the quiet margins of the wilderness, we rediscover a divine presence that is wild, untethered, and infused with reckless, unconditional grace. God is found not in booming pulpits or rigid doctrines, but in the beauty of the ordinary, the kindness of strangers, and the deep empathy of shared human brokenness. Ultimately, shattering the familiar clay pot allows our spiritual roots to breathe. We transition from holding beliefs with a tightly clenched fist to embracing divine mystery with open, empty hands. This journey transforms deep religious wounds into badges of survival. We realize that authentic spirituality does not require a middleman, a defensive fortress, or absolute certainty. Instead, it is an invitation to rest in unconditional love under the sanctuary of an open sky. We are left not as rebellious outcasts, but as brave pioneers of our own souls, finding our true home in radical love, boundless freedom, and the peace of the glorious unknown. The lesson: true spiritual maturity requires the courage to question inherited systems and embrace uncertainty. Faith is not about having all the answers, defending a fragile institution, or blindly obeying rules out of fear. Authentic spirituality is rooted in radical love, boundless grace, and the willingness to find the divine in the messy, unscripted margins of everyday human life. Start by gently auditing your own beliefs. Ask yourself if your current convictions are driven by genuine love or by an inherited fear of stepping out of line. Give yourself absolute permission to say, "I don't know," without feeling guilty or inadequate. Seek connection outside of traditional, structured walls. Take a quiet walk in nature. Have a deeply honest, tear-filled conversation with a friend, or simply sit in silence to reconnect with your own intuition. Stop treating life as a transactional performance where you must constantly earn your worth. Instead, practice giving yourself, and those around you, the grace to be wonderfully, perfectly human. What is one belief, expectation, or habit you have recently let go of to find more peace in your life? Please kindly share your perspective in the comments section below so we can all learn, reflect, and draw inspiration from each other's unique journeys. If this message resonated with you, please hit the subscribe button to support the channel. Your subscription gives us the motivation to keep creating deep, meaningful content for you in the future.